My name is Zach Porter. I'm an associate professor here in the College of Architecture, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you tonight to tonight's Hyde lecture by Gordon Stotz. Before I introduce Gordon, I do want to thank the Sheldon Museum of Art, as well as the Johnny Carson Center for Emerging Media Arts for their support and participation in Gordon's visit today. Immediately following the lecture and Q&A this evening, there will be a post-lecture reception back in Architecture Hall in our new building addition, the HDR Pavilion. So please join us there to enjoy some free food and to continue the conversation. Everyone is welcome. Gordon Stotz is a Los Angeles-based art director and set designer in the film and television industry. He received his Master of Architecture in 2012 from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and has previously worked in architectural offices in Washington, D.C. Gordon's work in the film and television industry includes contributions to such iconic productions as Barbie, Joker, Folie à Deux, No One Will Save You, The Fabelmans, Minx, The Lord of the Rings of Power, amongst many others. I think we're in for a real treat tonight. Please join me in welcoming Gordon Stotz.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. We sound good up there. You guys can hear me. Thank you so much. I just want to echo what Zach said and thank the Sheldon for having us. This is a pretty amazing venue. There's a lot of people here. Not nervous at all. So I was invited here, obviously, to talk about trajectory. That's the theme of this year's Hyde Lecture Series. And I think that when I got the invite, I understood what the assignment was right away because I have an architecture background that I got here from the University of Nebraska. And obviously, I'm not using it the way I was supposed to. I did something different. And so that's what I'm here to talk about a little bit. I enjoy making maps. I love a map. Maps are just really exciting to me. This is what I do to sort of unwind in the morning sometimes. I sit down on my computer and I just start drawing maps. I do these digitally now. I used to paint them, but now I just do them digitally so that I can sort of sketch in the morning and just, this is like a little practice I do once in a while. I now sell these at art fairs. It's a lot of fun. And every map that I do is different. And every map is a road, right? Very directly related to a trajectory, right? We're all on this path of life. We're all trying to get from point A to point B. Sometimes there's a faster route. Sometimes there's a slower route. Sometimes there's a more scenic route. And sometimes there's just a more fuel efficient route, right? But in the end, there's detours and we could all end up at the same place, maybe at different times. But you can get there. There's different paths that you can take. This is a map of Western Omaha. Actually, it's of Elkhorn, Nebraska, if you are familiar with it. This is where I grew up. This was my whole trajectory for my childhood was pretty much in this one map right here. I never really left this zone at all. This is where I went to high school. My first 2 years of college, I was going to UNO, so I was spending a lot of time here at that time as well. But it's also important because in this map is an old movie theater. It's not there anymore. It was called the AMC at the Oakview Mall. I saw The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring there when I was probably 13 years old. And it really changed my life. I remember knowing nothing about this movie when I got there. And I just remember when the credits rolled, I could not leave my seat. And I remember who I went with. I remember a lot of things about that day, but I didn't really know what that meant at the time. So time goes on. I go into college, and we're in architecture. And I'm here at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. This is our map of Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm studying architecture. I enjoy architecture. I'm getting to meet new people, and I start discovering what set design and art direction is, just a little bit. I'm watching like behind the scenes, right, of a movie. You're starting to understand, oh, this is what an art director does. There's concept art, there's construction happening, there's visual effects, there's all these different departments in a film set. And maybe there's a part of that that I can tap into. And how would an architect tap into that field? So I start taking some different courses, right? I'm sticking to architecture. I'm going to finish this architecture degree. I'm 4 or 5 years invested in this at this point, right? Why would I stop doing it? But I'm trying to find a way to like cater my education to discovering more about film and how can I do that? As it just so happens, for some reason, who knows why, Rumiko Honda decides to make a course called Architecture and Film. That was a huge coincidence. At the same time, I had met someone at the Johnny Carson School who told me about set design classes and production design classes. I didn't even know those were a thing. So I went over there and I got permission to take that class as well. I also then spent some time with Rumiko working on an independent study that I did. And at the time, I don't think I had a title for it. I don't even know if I could properly explain it to Rumiko at the time, but she was very helpful in just saying, go for it. And what I wanted to do was study how can we take a script or a text or a novel or a poem or anything that's just written in words and create a design for it, right? Something that hasn't been designed before, and how do the words from that text inform the design? So on the left, what you're seeing is a spaceship from a dystopian novel called The Dispossessed. And on the right, you're seeing Rapunzel's tower. And I just sort of enjoyed the process of like reading a few chapters or a few pages and doing a drawing. And then I would read a few more chapters or a few more pages and do another drawing over top of the old one and just layer them on top of each other. All these things are just sort of building up on top of each other. At this time, I'm still in school and wondering, what am I doing after school's over? Am I going to go into architecture? Am I going to go into film? Am I going to move to someplace exotic? Am I going to stay in Omaha or Lincoln? And I decided I'm going to apply to Weta Workshop. Weta Workshop, if you don't know, is a company based in New Zealand. They do a lot of practical effects. They have a digital portion that does visual effects. If you've ever seen Planet of the Apes, they are the ones who make all the monkeys look very, very real. They also create all the prosthetics for the Lord of the Rings series. They basically exist because of the Lord of the Rings series. So this is how I knew about them. I watched all the behind the scenes. I knew who they were. I wanted to work there. And I applied. And sure enough, I got this letter that said, nope. And I kept the letter, obviously. And it was a very nice letter. It was a very nice way of saying no. And for good reason. I mean, I'm looking back on it now like shocked that I even sent in a portfolio and mailed it to New Zealand. But I gave it a shot. So I'm graduating, and I'm not going into film, obviously, because Weta told me I couldn't. And so I'm going to go into architecture. I had the degree. Let's use it. Let's get a job. Let's make money. And I was fortunate enough at this time to be in a relationship. I had a partner who was willing to take the leap, and we're going to go to Washington, D.C., and we're going to work in Washington, D.C. And when you go to Washington, D.C., like having someone to go with is nice. It makes it a lot easier. I'm leaving behind Elkhorn, Nebraska, and Omaha, Nebraska, and Lincoln, Nebraska, all the places that I was familiar with, and going to a strange city that I didn't really know a lot about and didn't know anybody in. So having that person with me was very important. So I'm in Washington, D.C., and I get to work on a big architecture project, right? I'm working at an architecture firm. We get a big building like this, a big historic building, and we get to come in and we get to do all the great architectural design work. And this is sort of where I'm learning that being an architect isn't necessarily just being an architect. You're having to work with so many other departments. You're having to also work with the layers of time that have occurred in this building. So I have to sit there and break it all down, and we're working with structural engineers because it's a unique structure in a building. This is the Uline Arena building in Washington, D.C. Eventually what it became is this first floor became an REI space, and we built 3 more floors on top of it of office buildings or office space. And as I'm in Washington, D.C., I haven't forgotten about film work yet. I'm still thinking about the film. I'm still thinking about what would my role be in a film? How would I get into film? How can I keep preparing myself to work in film if that opportunity would arise? So I'm reading books. Like, what does an art director do? I have no idea. I didn't go to film school. I went to architecture school. So I'm reading books. I'm watching a lot of movies, and I'm networking. I'm starting to tell people very casually, I might be interested in film. And someone might come along and say, I know someone who works in New Orleans, and they're working on a film right now. And I get to be put in touch with that person. And I get to be put in touch with the person in Atlanta. And these people will come back around as people that will get me jobs in the future. So networking early on was really important. And they were the people I was able to ask questions to and say, how do I make the jump? Do I have to go to Los Angeles? Can I do this in Washington, D.C.? Can I do this in Atlanta? Do I have to do this in a foreign country? Where am I doing this at? When we're talking about trajectory, I thought I understood what the assignment was right away. We're going to talk about my path. But I also couldn't resist doing the classic Google search, what is a trajectory, right? And the key part of that definition for me is it's the path of an object under the action of given forces, right? So given forces could be a lot of things. You might be thinking these are good forces that propel you forward, but there's also bad forces as well, speed bumps and detours. And there's a lot of these that you have to sort of embrace along the way. And I think that makes thinking about your career very daunting. You're thinking, moving from DC to Los Angeles seems kind of silly. You don't know anybody in Los Angeles. It's expensive to live in Los Angeles. And you're going to take this master's degree, this full-time job. You have an architecture license now, and you're going to drive or fly over to Los Angeles and then go work in the film industry where you don't know anybody and you don't have a job lined up yet. And again, I don't think I could have done it alone, but at the time I had a person with me who I went on the journey with. And so we went to Los Angeles. This is my map of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is easier to grasp and absorb if you break it down into a lot of smaller cities. You gotta break it down into the neighborhoods. As a person from Nebraska, you can't really look at it as one big behemoth. If you break it down into smaller neighborhoods, it's much more manageable and less intimidating, for sure. So I'm here, I'm in Los Angeles, and I've made the jump. And I'm starting to discover a little bit more about filmmaking. So I start taking some jobs. I'm taking any job I can get. I'm taking jobs that pay me zero money, or I'm taking jobs that pay me in a free lunch. I just want to be on a film set and see how it works. In the same way that if you were in architecture and you went from studying architecture to practicing architecture professionally, you're going to learn a new thing, right? Practicing, you're learning a whole nother skill set. So actually being on a film set, even if it's a student film or an independent film or a really low budget film, or if it's me and Billy going out and making a video on his cell phone, I'm learning something. And it's helping me understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do in an art department. I took 6 months. I gave myself 6 months when I moved to Los Angeles. I said, I'm not going to take any jobs unless it's an art department related job. This is a luxury I had at the time because I'm with this other person, right? So I have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to work for 6 months, but at 6 months, I have to take a job because there is actually consequences to not working. And I'm learning more and more. We're doing paint samples. We're exploring alleys in downtown Los Angeles. We're just trying to figure out what filmmaking is. And I'm learning it very, very slowly, but I'm getting the hang of it a little bit. So here's my diagram. I made you this diagram. This is version 1 of the diagram. I apologize because it's probably not 100% accurate, but that's why I'm calling it version 1. I'm trying to show you I'm trying to compare architecture to an art department. because they are so similar. And I think the thing is, when I was in school, no one ever knew, or no one would tell me how they're similar. I think from an architecture point of view or from an art department point of view, if you've been in one or the other, you will understand this. And I think it just cleans it up a little bit. And I think it shows why the art department was the logical pivot for me from architecture. The production designer here is very similar to sort of the lead designer in the architecture firm. They're the ones who get to have all the fun and create the design. They're saying, I want this building to be all glass. I want it to look like this. And there's an art director, and they're like the project manager. I, as an art director, have to work with the construction team and resolve any issues that come up in the construction process. A set designer is kind of like a drafts person, right? They're making the drawings. They're making the details. They're still designing. They're still responsible for creating. But that's their more specific role. And a set decorator is really sort of like the interior designer of the film industry. Now, I'm leaving out 100 job titles here, right? So here's a few more of them and how they're a little bit related. But again, this is version 1. As someday I might make the whole web, every job description in the film industry, but there's, again, thousands of them. So I apologize for anybody who I'm leaving out here. For now, I'm going to focus on this little area. I only work as an art director or set designer currently, but in our department, again, there's lots of different positions: graphic designers, concept artists, model makers. There's also construction, paint, plaster, set decorators, set dressers, lead men. There's hundreds of positions. So I'm working on student films and small budget films. And this person who I networked with while I was in Washington, D.C., sends me an email. They said, send me your resume. Somebody's looking for an art PA in Los Angeles. I said, great. I sent it over to her, and like an hour later, I got a phone call. And this woman answered. I pick up, and there's a woman on the phone. She goes, I'm the art department coordinator. I'm working on this project. She goes, I can't tell you what it is. And I go, great. And I go, and she goes, when can you start? Well, I didn't have a job. We're in like month 5 of me about to like go find my job at Starbucks, go back into the architecture profession. She goes, when can you start? I said, tomorrow. So the next day I'm working on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 as an art assistant. And I knew it was going to be a Marvel thing because I just knew. There was a hint somewhere along the line that I knew it was going to be that, but I didn't know what it was going to be. So we're working on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. This is reshoots. Now reshoots, if you don't know, that's like we go do principal photography, we shoot the whole film, and then they kind of take some time and they edit it together and they discover, oops, we forgot something, or we couldn't hear this, or we need to fix this, right? So then they do reshoots, and it's a couple days or a couple weeks of shooting to just kind of polish the film up a little bit. So I will say I worked on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but it was for reshoots, and that is important to note. So I'm working with a production designer and an art department coordinator on this. And these two people are people that I will note I still work with to this day. And I still see on a regular basis, and I'm still communicating with on a regular basis. And they are still hiring me on projects to this day. So I work on a few projects with them, and then there's sort of like this fork in my path, right? I have an opportunity to go work on a project called Hotel Artemis. Hotel Artemis is a relatively small film in comparison to the Marvel projects I was working on before, and it's also relatively small to the other project I had an opportunity to work on, which was Avatar: Way of the Water. Now this is in 2017. Avatar approaches me and says, do you want to work as an art department assistant on this project? And I'm thinking, how could I say no to this? Like, this is like 3 years ago, like childhood me would have been like, what am I doing? I got to take Avatar. I got to work on Avatar. It's a great opportunity. But I knew these people on Hotel Artemis. I'd worked with them before, and I built this relationship with them. And it was also, again, a relatively smaller project. And I remember my architecture firm that I worked on. They were relatively small when I first started there too. And I appreciated that I was able to have a bigger role in a smaller firm. So ultimately I ended up working on Hotel Artemis. Which in hindsight, I could say was a good decision or a bad decision, but I do think that I'd still be in the same place today, no matter what path I went on. but that's the path that I chose. So there's big projects out there, there's small projects out there, there's commercials, there's music videos. I'm working on all these different things. We're gonna fast forward a couple of years here. I'm working as an assistant art director, a set designer, and I've worked with this production designer and this art department coordinator on a few projects now, and I'm just, I'm always thinking about Lord of the Rings, how much I love Lord of the Rings. I had a roommate who said, if you could work on any project, what would you work on? And I said, well, it's too late. They already made it. It's Lord of the Rings. I love that movie so much. It's fantasy. It's great design. There's no way I'm ever going to get to work on that movie. Sure enough, about a week later, this production designer that I worked with on my first project sends me this text message. Apparently, Amazon was making a TV show about the Lord of the Rings. And I was blown away. You can tell I was so blown away that I actually screenshotted that text immediately because it says now right there, right? I said, someday someone's going to ask me to talk about this and I'm going to be ready and I'm going to have this queued up and ready to go. This is maybe the most emotional text message I've ever gotten. I was alone in Atlanta working on a different project at the time. And my two dreams were to work on Lord of the Rings and in film and to go to New Zealand. I mean, just because of Lord of the Rings, I just wanted to visit New Zealand. How cool is that? So here I am at Hobbiton with my Nebraska shirt on and just living the best life. This is where I celebrated Thanksgiving that year. So I had a little Hobbit feast for Thanksgiving that year. Working on Lord of the Rings was the full circle moment. Right? That was me. I was I love this franchise growing up. I watched these things relentlessly while I was in college. I was watching behind the scenes and learning about how films are made. And sure enough, here I am working on the show. And I couldn't have asked for anything more. It was great. And I got to visit New Zealand while I was at it. So more projects have come up over time. Working as a set designer, as an art director, we get different projects, have different opportunities. The hard part about working in film, there's several things, but there are long hours. You're talking 12-hour days a lot of times. You're working with these small groups of people. It's fairly stressful because we're building these large budget things in a very condensed amount of time. You're talking weeks to months. And so you start working with the same people. And you start meeting new people, but working with similar types of people. And I think something that's really important to understand is that this community is really small. And so your relationships that you build are actually more important than maybe a normal profession because it's so small. We all know each other. And I just want to point out the fact that the relationships are just extremely important here. All right. So I'm going to talk about the most recent project I worked on. Or that I can talk about that I worked on. That's out. So this is Joker Folie à Deux. I worked on this a couple years ago. It just came out recently. I was able to secure a little bit of permission to show some of the behind the scenes from this. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about how the trajectory of an individual set might come to be. When I was a student, I didn't really understand how sets were made. I didn't understand what set design was or art direction was. I had a little bit of knowledge based on the classes I took or the books I read, but I think it's important to kind of go over this because I like to think that if I was sitting in this audience, this is what I would like to see. This is what I want to understand a little bit. So we're going to kind of go over just a few sets. The first one I'm going to go over in great detail, a little less detail for the other ones. So Joker's exciting because it's fantasy film. Right? That's just like Lord of the Rings. It's not like we're coming into an auditorium and filming in an auditorium. We have to sort of design every aspect of it. There's not a lot of real life spaces that we can use to portray this space. That makes it extra exciting to me. This first set I'm going to talk about is the observation room and the observation and holding rooms. So the whole process starts with a script. There's a script, there's words on the page, and those words could dictate what that design is. Depending on how the writer has phrased things, you might understand that the room is cold and dark, and it needs to be cold and dark. A cold room kind of evokes a certain picture in your mind, and you get to kind of play with that a little bit. But we also do an intense amount of research. Research is kind of its own job in the art department. We had a full-time researcher working full-time researching all the time. And this person would pull images from anything. This could be from a book, it could be from a movie, it could be from anything. I think one of these is actually a famous image, but I could be wrong. But this space we know from the script is going to be the space where our hero character, Arthur, enters the building and walks down a hallway. Anytime he's going to and from the security van, he's going through this hallway. There's also an important interview that takes place in this set as well. So we know what it has to function as. So we kind of know how many rooms we need, and it's giving us the program for the design. The research is here to kind of give us some of that character, looking at brick that's been painted, or looking at how this countertop works with the different set dressing that's on it. There's a telephone, there's a fan, there's a clock. All these little things play into it. Even the costumes department is looking at research to figure out how they're going to handle their costumes. We're looking at jail interview, real interviews with real people that have happened. Our story takes place in the 1980s, so it's also important for us to try to find period-specific information as well. Anything that we can find that's 1980s, anything that we can find that's based in the 80s or before, or sort of in a New York kind of area, because that's how Gotham City kind of feels, is sort of what we're targeting in this case. And we're looking for anything. We could be looking for like bar sizes, how this door is laid out, how the bars have aged and how the rust has started to form, what the floor looks like. There's like a weird red spot on the floor. I don't know what that is, but that's amazing research. That's a great piece of information. These radiators, they're not like the traditional radiator that you think of, but this is a radiator. It's an old radiator, and it goes a different direction than what I visually would think of originally. So the color of the walls, all these things can play into it. How the ceiling is barrel shaped instead of just being a flat ceiling. We're looking at all these pieces. So when we do a set, we have sets, we have locations. A set is usually something that we're building on a sound stage. We're building it from scratch, out of wood and plaster and paint, and we're putting it on a sound stage. It exists for this movie, and we shoot it. There's also locations. Locations when we go to a place. If we were filming a big lecture scene, we'd film it right here. Someone reminded me of the movie Terms of Endearment today, right? Terms of Endearment was filmed here on campus. If you went outside this door, you would see the location that they filmed Terms of Endearment at in the 1980s. So this particular set, this observation holding room, has an exterior location. So when our hero Arthur shows up and he goes in the doors from the outside, you're seeing him at the location. And then when he's inside, he's on our set. The location is in New Jersey, and the set is in Burbank, California. So we have to survey the location, which is what you're seeing here, and take that information. We're not just surveying it for sizes, we're also taking color samples of the brick and the stone and everything that's there, because we're probably not able to paint the brick or the stone. Through our process, we start doing sketches, just like you would in architecture. We're trying to figure out rough sizes for the holding room, the observation room, the hallway, how the intake works, and how that matches up to this exterior location that we're also partially building on the soundstage. We also have to leave enough room for the van to show up. And it just continues forward. In this case, we have a set designer that's drafting by hand. He's drawing the sets by hand. For those of you who don't know, that means like a pencil on paper on a table. There's also a little 3D modeling happening. I believe in this case, I did some of this 3D modeling in SketchUp, just to sort of show how that hand-drawn set was going to look in 3D. A lot of times, looking at a set in 3D on a computer or through a physical model is extremely important to us, because in film, we're experiencing these spaces only through these images. You're not experiencing the spaces in a film by walking in and looking up or looking down or looking around yourself. We can kind of force you to see the set the way we want to. And then eventually that model, either the model itself or the image that we had shown, was handed off to a concept artist. And this concept artist is a real artist that gets into Photoshop and rendering software. They work with light and color to really conceptualize the set. And I'm sure you've all seen concept art before, but doing this for every single set was extremely important on our movie. It kind of helps us create a cohesiveness to the film. We can use color, start looking at the colors and the materials throughout the film. This project is also important for me to share because it's the first time I've ever worked with a team that works in Unreal Engine. So there's a lot of Unreal Engine used in this project. We actually built every set virtually in Unreal Engine. And the team that worked on it is extremely talented. They made this model of the set. You can see here it's already evolved, and we're using the yellow brick throughout the set. These images that they created, we used to help sell the set to the director and to the director of photography. And they actually also went into it in a VR headset and were able to walk through the sets and experience them. I believe the director of photography actually came in and actually lit the set in Unreal Engine as well. So he could come in and do his lighting layout in this program. And then when it came time to actually lighting the set, it took a lot of the guesswork out of it, which could save him a lot of money and time and labor on the back end. Another view of it, you can see this green stripe in the back. We were always working on like, what was the color of this stripe going to be? We loved having the stripe there, the graphics, the painted stripe on the floor. Here's sort of a hero image that we had of the interview taking place with a one-way mirror and a window. And of course, while that's happening and we're working on these materials and modeling it up in the Unreal Engine, the set designer's finishing up the drawings by hand, and he's doing other details as well. Doors, the jail bars need a lot of detailing to happen as well. And while all that's happening, and we've had the design sort of like honed in at this point, I have to sort of lead the charge on finalizing, like, what are these materials going to be? What are we making this out of? And in film, we don't just deal with the final form of the building, we have to deal with the element of time. And in Arkham Asylum, a lot of times past, it's not a pretty space. It's very aged. There's a lot of weathering that's happened and rust and deterioration. So we go through a lot of samples, and we build samples of a lot of our different materials because there's plaster and there's bricks and there's tiles, and we're doing a lot of it. And so we're doing samples to help save us time because we don't want to really paint an entire room the wrong color and then have to go back and repaint it. So here's some samples of plaster. We do jail bar samples, flooring samples. Here's a brick wall sample from the set. And then I sort of take all that information at the end of the day as an art director and create a simple little paint elevation with some of the call outs on it. And I hand that off to the paint and plaster department, and they can get started on painting and plastering it. This is a table that we had in our art department office. Hardware sounds so simple, but it can be so complicated when you're talking about 1980s Gotham City, because there's certain things you just don't want to use. You can't go to Home Depot and just buy a bunch of door handles and doorknobs and put them on sets. So you're custom making a lot of things, and you're also trying to find unique ways to make modern hardware look a little bit more antique or older. All right, so this set, this observation holding room, is starting to be built. On the left-hand side, what you're seeing is the back side of a set. It's just a 1x3. It's just really thin luan, which is like 1/8-inch plywood basically. And then everything else is just built up on top of it. The tile is CNC MDF. That's the yellow tile. You can see the check-in desk over here on the right. You're gonna see another photo of this later. But it all just starts as wood. Then the plasters come in. They plaster on all the texture to give it all the wonderful character that we have. This is a really good image on the left. You can see all the little details there when the light hits it just right of all the plaster age. The stripe's been painted in. This is all built on a soundstage. And of course, here's that exterior, right? We saw the photo of it earlier in the survey. I don't know if you remember it, start thinking about it, but this is what it looks like. That we built this on stage. This is the fake one that we built on our soundstage. So when he walks in, we have one that matches the exterior location. It's sort of a little game in editing we have to play to make it seem seamless. And here's some more finished photos of the set as they come together. And the lighting has now come in, and the set dressing has come in, and all this sort of adds to the set. And these things get layered on and built up over time. These bars were built brand new. They were like shiny metal when they were done. So all this aging that has to come in, and paint just doesn't come in and just paint it on. These things are built up again in layers over time. And our hero cell where the interview takes place here. And our observation room. And of course, here's the final image from the trailer of this set. So all these pieces have finally come together. We have the final set. We have the final footage of the set. In fact, this is even really the final form. The final form would be me playing the video of it. So you could hear the audio and the sound and the score and the dialogue. All right, let's do another set. This is the F ward, the seclusion, the holding cell. You all know what this looks like because you guys have seen a movie before. You think you know what a seclusion cell looks like, but I don't know if you really do know what a seclusion cell looks like. Do you only know it because you've seen it in a movie, or have you actually experienced a real one before? So we have to start from scratch again. We're doing all the research again. SetDeck has found us this amazing door. It's actually a real door. This is a metal real door that's rusty. It's perfect. We have to use this in our set. We love this image that the researcher found. These walls are shiny. It like evokes this feeling that like no moisture is ever leaving this space, right? Like this place is like sticky and basementy, and like I need a dehumidifier bad. There's something about this image that's so wonderful. And the curved staircase is very ominous as well. So our guys did a paint sample of this. I love this paint sample so much. Our paint department and our plaster department made this sample, and I wanted to take this home with me so bad. This thing is like beautiful to me. They did 2 different color schemes on here. This happens all the time. We're always playing with the finest of variables in something. So we're playing with 2 different colors here. I think we ended up going with the darker one on the left, but I really can't be sure. Our set designer in this particular set is doing it in Rhino. So he's designing it. You can see our door here. This is the door that SetDeck found us at the end of the hallway. We love the idea that there was a boiler or something at the end of the hallway here. All these pipes are coming out of it. There's cages around it. We have all these seclusion doors that are super bolted shut with extra bolts and small windows on them. And here we are back in Unreal Engine again. So they're taking that Rhino model and they're adding all this material to it and trying to give us that really wet look to the whole set where the walls are wet and it's just a miserable place to be. And there's a hero cell inside there as well where Arthur is held for a period of time. Sorry guys, spoiler alert. But we also have to take into account, like, we want a window in there, right? You have to find a way to light the sets. And that's something that sometimes we don't think about, but we have to work with the director of photography on that. They want to have light on these sets, and having the right amount was important. So we actually built several mock-ups of this window to make sure that we were able to pump a bunch of light through it and it was going to light up the room enough to be filmable. And then I'm working with the set designer. We're making little drawings of how we're doing different hardware on the doors, how we can reuse hardware from different parts of Arkham Asylum. This is a huge asylum. I think it stands to reason that we could reuse some hardware from a different part of the asylum down here in this portion of the building. We even use different hardware and different doors to sort of illustrate the idea that maybe some of these doors needed extra reinforcement at some time. So we went and got a handful of new latches or locks. Here are those doors before they're installed. Again, all the paint and the age that's been built up on them, adding rivets and adding rust and adding this hardware. And here's that set, the photos the night before we shot it. So here's the end of the hallway. This is the door. You can see the rusty door. The door is the real door. This is a real rusty door, but everything that's around it is just wood. It's just wood that's been plastered and painted. And the guys did an amazing job to give it that look, to make it look like it's been metal. And again, looking back at that staircase, you can think about that reference image I showed earlier. We love the curved staircase. There's a scene where Arthur falls down these stairs, and having him tumble down and around the curve was interesting. And his cell here, looking in and out of his cell, and how much light we could get through that window again, and what his cell might look like. And again, the final photo of the final still from the film. So we're seeing the Arthur being dragged down the hallway here. So we designed a few sets, and before we start building them, we have to figure out where we're going to put these sets. Here's a big soundstage at Warner Brothers. This is where we're going to put our sets. So our job as art directors and as set designers is to take those sets and put them on a stage and make sure that they fit on the stage. And this is where sort of an architecture background actually comes into play a lot more than I might have originally thought, and now I think about it constantly. Here on the stage, there's weight limits on the floor. There's fire lanes around the perimeter. There's a lot of codes that we have to sort of obey when we put the sets on a stage. But we also have to really start coordinating with our other departments. Just like we would coordinate with engineers, we have to coordinate with the lighting department, the camera department, all these different groups of people to decide, do we have enough space to put all the ancillary pieces of the set around it? How are we going to get this car, this van, over to the front of our building? All right, I got 2 more sets to go through here. So this is a meeting room set. I'm not actually going to talk about the meeting room set. This is an unreal image that you're seeing of this set. But what I want to focus on here is what you're seeing outside these windows on the right, and also the map. Remember? So what's outside the windows looks so simple. You're sitting there going, oh, well, of course, you're seeing a little bit of a building, like blah, blah, blah. That makes a lot of sense. But when I was working on this set, the question was, what are we seeing out these windows? Like, are we seeing Gotham City? Are we seeing water? What are we seeing out these windows? And to answer that question, we actually had to design Arkham Island and Gotham City. Here's the final photo of that set. Again, right before it's going to be shot. You can see there's definitely a brick building outside this window, and you can definitely see the map of Gotham City. So the map of Gotham City. The map of Gotham City was actually designed in the first Joker movie. It was already designed. But it needed to be really refined because now we had to figure out where's Arkham Asylum at. And how are we shooting this giant piece? When we see a helicopter shot of the city in the movie, how do we make that? So we kind of had an idea of where Arkham Asylum was going to sit. This is sort of an early iteration of it. It was going to sit over here on this western side. And then we had this path. Arthur gets in the van, and he has to drive it over to the courthouse. Spoiler alert, he's going to court. So he's going to the courthouse and back and forth and back and forth. And so we have this path that we kind of drew in the city. We had a logical reason for why that is, but we're not going to get into that right now. But I had to break down the city. We had to break down the city into many different smaller parts so that the visual effects team could take real places and stitch them together to create a fictional place called Gotham City. So we always knew this was sort of a New Jersey, New York kind of location. So we took Brooklyn, and that became this northeastern bank. We took New Jersey, and that became the western bank. And that, naturally made Gotham City sort of Manhattan. So we called the Bronx up north. We had like an industrial part of the Bronx. We had Hell's Kitchen from Manhattan, and we had a financial district. That's where the courthouse is at. In fact, when you see the exterior of the courthouse in the movie, that is actually the courthouse that's in the Manhattan Financial District. But the island is San Francisco. So the island, San Francisco, and the western bank of Gotham City is San Francisco. So the ratio of distance from Arkham Island to that western bank had to be equivalent to what was happening in San Francisco. So this is Yerba Buena Island in San Francisco. This is the island that's in the middle of San Francisco and Oakland. There's a bridge that goes and connects the two. Treasure Island is there on the bottom right of this image. So our Arkham Island is Yerba Buena Island. And the distance from Yerba Buena to San Francisco is how far Arkham Island is to Gotham City. We do all these layouts. So we have all these pieces to start stitching together now. We have an exterior location in New Jersey that is Arkham Asylum, right? That's our exterior location. We have to take that piece of the puzzle, and there's a scale to that building, and we have to put it on Yerba Buena Island, and we have to arrange it in a way that it aligns with the island, and that the bridge that actually currently exists from Yerba Buena Island connects to Yerba Buena. We have to make it also connect to our fictional space. So on the left, you're seeing the actual location in New Jersey, and on the right, you're seeing me overlaying that location with our fictional floor plan of Arkham Asylum onto Yerba Buena Island. And at this point, we've decided that Yerba Buena, we're going to sink it a little deeper into the water because it's too big. So we're going to make it a little bit smaller by sinking it more into the water. I don't know how visual effects did that, but they did it. And here, you're seeing us back in Unreal Engine. Now we're modeling this in an Unreal Engine. They get the topography from Yerba Buena. They have all of our 3D assets from Arkham Asylum. They're also starting to stitch in San Francisco here. I believe that this image, what you are seeing, is only San Francisco. And here, again, we're refining this further. until eventually we've stitched all these pieces together. The Hell's Kitchen, the financial districts, the Bronx, Yerba Buena, Arkham Asylum, the fictional part of Arkham Asylum that we've created on the back end, and all these smokestacks. And this is the image that we created. We hand that asset off. This is another image from Unreal Engine. We hand this asset off then to visual effects with the diagrams of all the different plates we need. They go out and collect all that information and they stitch it together. And this is the final shot in the film. I am blown away by this. I know that I don't owe anything to the visual effects department, but I appreciate them so much because the way that this came together, I'm just blown away by it. And all that work that we did on the front end to make this come together, it was really a big payoff when I finally saw the movie to see this all come together. Also, this bridge is not the bridge that's there between Yerba Buena Island and San Francisco. It's also not a bridge that exists from anything to Manhattan. It's a random bridge in New Jersey. So here's our location in New Jersey of Arkham Asylum. We have this wonderful yellow brick building. This helps inform why we're doing all the yellow brick on the building. Obviously, some new graphics have been added in to make it Arkham State Hospital. But this wedge of the building, where this building comes together in a V shape, this is where we had determined, based on our fictional floor plan, of where this meeting room was located. And again, that's why when we see out this window, we're seeing a yellow brick building at an angle. And that has also now informed our map, which you see up on the wall. So all these pieces had to come together before this set was ever built and shot for us to make this happen. All right, one more. This is the location. We decided to take downtown Los Angeles in 2023 and turn it into 1980s Gotham City. So we were assigned about 1.5 blocks to 2 blocks of street, and we have to make this thing look like 1980s Gotham City. And there's all these different pieces to the puzzle that we have to start thinking about when we're doing a location. There are real life advertisements, graffiti, signs, street signs, one-way signs. If we were just doing a period piece, you couldn't use these street signs, these street lights, all this stuff would be not period. We'd have to change all this. So our concept artist gives us a nice little image. We also have to change the actual street itself. Visual effects has to come in and make the street longer and deeper and more like Manhattan, but ultimately like Gotham City. And we add all this trash under the street, and period vehicles have to come into the street, and new graphics have to be made for some buildings, and new graffiti has to be made on all the buildings because, frankly, we don't know what a lot of the real graffiti was, right? You don't know who it is or what it was saying. A lot of it's different language, or it could be a code, and so you have to replace all that. Our concept artist also made this nice elevation with our graphic designer of all these different storefronts. This particular portion of a street has 3 theaters on it, 3 old theaters. And so we were going to use those theaters and put new names for new movies on them. So there's also a little involvement from the writer to figure out what movies do you want us to have on these marquees. Are these real movies? Are they fake movies? But this all sort of adds to the age and the character of the street. I'm working on making this intense diagram of the street showing where our hero actor is going to get out of his car. He's going to run down the street. We're going to have all these different picture vehicles placed all throughout the street, and every single storefront has a laundry list of items that we have to do. We either have to remove things, leave things, or replace things. So sometimes we were able to say, yeah, this hat store is okay because the hats are kind of 1980s, right? But sometimes you're in there, you're selling DJ equipment. Well, we can't have modern DJ equipment on screen. So we might tell you to close your store and keep the rolling door down, or we might redress it as something completely different. But it was a huge task by set dressing to come in and really redress this entire street. Here's a photo of that street. We even got lucky with some pigeons on the day. Again, we brought in piles of trash on the street. And all these things we can't really bring in ahead of time because you never really know what's going to happen. Even though there's security, you never really know what's going to happen to your set if you leave it overnight, especially in downtown Los Angeles. And here's some final stills from that shot. So here you can see these graphics and some graffiti in the background that we've added in. And a picture vehicle. Even picture vehicles. We're designing graphics for picture vehicles. And visual effects, again, extended this street to make it longer and taller. All right. I'm going to do a short conclusion here because I think we went long probably, but I just appreciate everybody being here. I just hope everybody sort of sees this as not really a template for how to take your architecture degree and go work in film, but really like to think about what is possible, right? What is your Lord of the Rings? Like, what are you really passionate about? And if it's not architecture, maybe think about how you could use that architecture degree or your film degree to your advantage to get you someplace else. I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Gordon, for a wonderful lecture. We do have time for a few questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. Hi there. So I am a scenic design student here at the university, and I am curious to know how it might be different, how your process might look different for a new form of media that's being like introduced to you, like a new storyline, such as the new Joker movie, how you would be able to adapt that to what you do, as compared to like we work off scripts that have done thousands of productions in the past, and we have like reference points for how they have been done or things like that. So I'm curious to what your process looks like for a project such as that.
Are you talking about how, for instance, it's like a script or a story that's never been depicted in film before, basically, versus one that has? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Joker is interesting because obviously there is a first movie in this sequence, so we get to look at a lot of that for generally how the city wants to look. And luckily a lot of the design team were similar people, so they had the knowledge base already that we could tap into and use them for that. For something new where it hasn't been done before, it's really it's nice because you have sort of a blank slate. In the case of something like No One Will Save You, we're doing a house from scratch that no one's ever seen or done before, so luckily there's not really like a wrong way to do it, right? So we get to be a little bit more inquisitive and look into a lot more research and sort of discover that. I think the research is where it's a big difference. We don't have another film to sort of draw from, so we have to start kind of from scratch.
Do we have other questions?
You're getting your steps in today.
I am.
Hello. For me, I think it was really interesting to see how you showed the sets and how that kind of developed over time. But what I'm missing a little bit is you as a set designer. What does your day actually look like? What do you do? Do you wake up, draw a map, and then go to Rhino or SketchUp and do the set? So that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. I got asked that a couple times today when I talked to other students too. The day-to-day on a film could just vary so greatly depending on what you're doing that day. And as an art director, it can vary quite a bit from day to day. As a set designer, my day would typically be getting to an office and sitting at my computer and working on a set. In the instance of Lord of the Rings, we had such a big scope of things to do. A lot of my time was spent doing little details. I was working on doors and columns and very specific things, and I could spend a whole day just working on one door. Sometimes on a different size project like No One Will Save You, where we're designing an entire house, my whole day could be surveying a real location house and trying to translate that into a new set and doing an entire drawing for the whole house and trying to model this all in SketchUp that will eventually get turned into construction drawings for construction. A set designer spends a lot more time at a computer. They might be surveying a location or measuring a real reference that we like, but a lot more time spent at the computer. Where an art director might spend a lot more time going over to construction, checking in with construction, answering any questions that might be coming up, or resolving any issues that might come up during the construction process.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
across the room, of course.
I think the next question's coming from over there.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you. I'm curious as how long it takes from getting the script to building it and shooting, and just the whole timeline of everything.
Yeah. So I like to say, like, the Uline Arena project that I worked on in architecture, we started that a couple years after I moved to Washington, D.C. And when I left Washington, D.C., it was a few months away from being finished. So I was there for 4 years, a little over 4 years. So that was like a 5-year project. In film, the projects can vary greatly. I've been on projects where I show up one day on like the Taylor Swift music video I did. Like, we designed that whole house in a week, and like we built it in like 2 weeks, and they shot it for maybe a day or two. So that was extremely quick. That goes extremely quick. In something like Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of research that's happening, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening even before I come onto the project. When we, with an art department, we don't all come on at the same time. A production design's there early. They're breaking down the script and sort of getting it all ready for us. So when we show up, we have things that we can jump onto right away. So it can vary. It can vary a lot. On Lord of the Rings, I was on that for 14 months, 16 months. I was on it for 16 months. I don't think I'll ever be on a project longer than that again. Like, that would be shocking. But they can vary from being very quick to very long.
Welcome back, Gordon. Good to see you back.
Thank you.
Thanks for the lecture. Really interesting, your trajectory, to use the theme of the lecture again. I guess I want to link it back to that. I'm curious if your experience and the people you've worked with, if you're an anomaly relative to, like, does other disciplines that get trained in one thing end up in Hollywood and do something entirely different than what they're maybe trained for, in the same way that you've done with architecture? Yeah,
I don't know how it works in other departments. I'm always curious to know, like, in a like the rigging department, the lighting department, how they get into that. I definitely will make it a point. I need to make it a point to, like, ask that question more often, because that comes up within our department a lot. We like to ask each other, like, where did you come from? Like, how did you get into this? Because there are a lot of people who have a theater background. There are universities out there that have a production design pathway, and there are also just a lot of interior designers and architects who have somehow, by way of either being in Los Angeles and finding the work, they've come to this path. So I'm not unique in that way. I think that architecture lends itself very well into making that transition, for sure.
Hey, Gordon. I just
Hi.
grabbed the mic from
Yeah, perfect.
from Brian. So I actually have the reverse trajectory from you. I started doing set design in college, and then not as not as a major, but as a sort of an extracurricular activity, and then moved into architecture in grad school. And one of the things that always fascinated me about working on sets is that the materials you use, you're almost never using as they were intended. Unlike in architecture, where we use metal panel systems and so on that are warranted and this and that, you can't misuse things very easily in architecture, but in set design, you almost always are. You don't go to McMaster Carr and order the old door from the prison.
Well, we use McMaster Carr all the time.
I know, I saw that on there. But you're always misusing things. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you get to making decisions about how you actually put things together. How much of that relies on the skill of the plasterers and painters, and how much of that is you figuring out, what part from McMaster Carr represents this other?
Yeah, I think it comes down to a few things, because, like, McMaster Carr is great. Not to plug McMaster Carr here, but they can get us something like the next day if we want it. They have it, it's ready to go. They'll deliver it. It's a wonderful resource. But I think a lot of it comes down to really the lead time on things. If I'm sitting there looking at, there was a tile floor that I was doing in one of the rooms in Joker, and I wanted to use a real tile. I just wanted to use the real thing. And the specific color that I was trying to get, this gold color, this little like 1-inch floor tile, it was like a 6-week lead time. And I was like asking them, I was like, can you please get it to us in 5 weeks? I need it in 5 weeks. So the lead time was really like a big part of that. With like the brick, I think it came down to a discussion with construction into what made more sense for them. There are ways that they can make a lot of brick a lot quicker, and it must be a lot cheaper than buying the real thing. In the case of that yellow tile that you saw in the observation holding room, that was used in like several places throughout Arkham Asylum. We actually had like a full-time crew almost making tile for like an extended period of time, because these were CNC'd out of MDF, and we had to make all the bullnose curves to it and the coves for the bases, and we wanted to make these look like real concrete blocks. So I think it just comes down to a lot of discussion with construction into what is most cost effective, but also that timeline is always so critical because we're going so quickly. It's really hard for us in film to make the decision on what we want for that material fast enough, because there are such long lead times with real bricks and tiles and things like that.
Welcome back, Gordon, again. So when you were here, I think the foundation level program was visual literacy, and now we teach things like design thinking, which has an emphasis on collaboration. I heard your passion was really coming through on some of the things you're describing. And I heard you say it more than once, we love the idea that there was a boiler room at the end of the hall or something.
Yep.
And so who is we, and what does that look like, and who are you, like, to what extent are you collaborating?
Yep.
And what does that feel like?
I say we a lot because like there's no part of this that's really just me. There's research that's involved. I would like to like acknowledge that our art department was absolutely huge on Joker. It was a big art department. There were a lot of people involved in making it come together. And I'm saying a collective we because it's something I just trained myself to do, because I never want people to think that I'm excluding them from it. There's a production designer who's overseeing everything, but there's also like all these other people. Like when it comes down to the ceiling of a set, it's not just us in the art department that are making the decision. There's these other departments, the camera department, the rigging department, the lighting department. They have to figure out how to get wires in and to make lights. So, I mean, it is a we, and I felt that way in architecture as well. I never liked saying, I did this project or I made this design or whatever, because there's no one part of it that I could sit there and say, like, I did this all by myself. So I've just kind of come into a good habit, I think, but I think maybe it annoys some people. I like to say we a lot, so.
I think that's a good point to end on. We'll be able to continue this conversation over at the reception right now across the quad in the HDR Pavilion at Architecture Hall. But please join me one more time in thanking Gordon Stotz for a wonderful lecture.